In October 2023, in McLennan County, Texas, 35-year-old Hannah Mercer stood beside a black and white cow that looked as though somebody had dragged a paintbrush across her hide. The cow was called June. Her white coat carried narrow dark stripes along the ribs, shoulders, and neck. Too straight to look ordinary, too uneven to look painted. Hannah kept one hand on June's weather wooden gate, while the other held a feed bucket. Across the road, two neighbors laughed. Tiger cow, one of them called. The other laughed harder. Hannah didn't answer. She had $3,184 left in the farm account, a $7,900 equipment payment, due before Christmas, and 43 acres that had produced almost nothing to the summer heat. June was the least of her problems. At least, that was what Hannah believed. The farm had belonged to her grandfather, Walter Mercer, who had raised cattle there for 52 years. When he died, Hannah inherited the land, the herd, an aging John Deere 4020, and a mountain of bills nobody had mentioned until the bank started calling. The 4020 sat beneath a corrugated metal shed, its green paint faded almost gray. Walter had bought it used in 1978 and had kept it running with the same stubbornness he used to repair everything else. Hannah trusted that tractor. She wasn't sure she trusted the bank. By noon, the story of the strange cow had already traveled farther than Hannah expected. At the feed store, a rancher named Dale Whitaker leaned against the counter and grinned when she walked in. "Heard you've got yourself a tiger." Hannah picked up a 50-pound mineral bag. "She's a cow." Sure looks confused about that. The room laughed. Hannah paid and left. She had learned years earlier that explaining yourself to people who had already decided you were foolish only made you sound more foolish. But when she returned home, June wasn't at the fence. That was strange. June never wandered far from the water trough. Hannah followed fresh hoof print behind the barn and found her standing beneath an old pecan tree. The cow was staring at the ground, not eating, not drinking, staring. Hannah stepped closer. June lowered her head and pushed her nose into the soil. There was nothing visible except dry grass and a scatter of pecan shells. Hannah crouched. The dirt beneath the tree was darker than the surrounding ground. She rubbed it between her fingers. Moist. That made no sense. There had been no rain in 6 days. She dug down 2 inches. The soil became colder. Then she smelled something faint. Not manure. Not fertilizer. Metal. Hannah stopped digging. Behind her, June gave a low, uneasy moo. Hannah looked toward the farmhouse. Her grandfather's old notes were still stored in a metal filing cabinet beside the kitchen. She remembered something Walter had said 2 summers before his death. Never move the cows when they keep choosing the same place. At the time, Hannah had thought it was another one of his strange farming sayings. Now she wasn't so sure. That evening, she opened the filing cabinet. Most of the folders contained cattle vaccination records, breeding dates, hay receipts, and handwritten weather observations. Then she found a brown envelope. There was no label. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Walter standing beside a younger version of June. Except June hadn't been born yet. Hannah stared at the picture. The cow beside Walter was smaller, perhaps 6 months old, but the markings were unmistakable. The same dark stripes, the same white forehead, the same black patch beneath the left eye. On the back of the photograph, Walter had written one sentence. "Do not let them call her." Hannah read it twice, then a third time. She searched the records for June's mother. The cow had been registered as 14 Bluebell, a normal black and white commercial cow. No unusual markings. No breeding notes. Nothing. Hannah returned to the barn with the photograph in her hand. June was lying in the straw. When Hannah approached, the cow lifted her head. For the first time, Hannah noticed something she had never noticed before. The stripes weren't random. They followed the animal's muscle lines. Shoulder, rib, hip, almost like a map. Hannah reached for her phone. She photographed June from both sides. Then she zoomed in. The pattern seemed even stranger. There were tiny breaks in the dark bands, almost perfectly spaced. She opened an old cattle genetics website she had bookmarked years earlier. Her internet connection crawled. Hannah waited. A paragraph appeared on the screen. Coat patterns could be influenced by multiple genes, developmental processes, and interactions between pigment-producing cells. She read it again. Then she looked at June. "If you're just weird," Hannah whispered, "that's fine." June blinked. "But if you're something else..." She didn't finish. The next morning, a white county pickup stopped at the gate. Hannah recognized the driver immediately. Tom Barlow, the county livestock inspector, was 61 and had spent nearly 4 decades around cattle. He climbed out carrying a clipboard. "Morning, Hannah." "Morning." He looked past her toward June. "I hear you've got a problem." Hannah's expression tightened. "She isn't sick." "Didn't say she was." Tom walked toward the pasture. June moved away from him. Tom watched the cow for several seconds. Then he laughed. Not cruelly, almost professionally. "I've seen strange markings before." "So have I." "You're worried about the pattern?" Hannah hesitated. "I don't know what I'm looking at." Tom nodded. "That makes 2 of us." He stepped closer to June. The cow suddenly turned and kicked dirt backward. Tom stopped. His smile disappeared. June wasn't afraid of people. She was reacting to something behind the fence. Tom looked down. Hannah followed his eyes. A narrow strip of dark soil ran beneath the fence line. It continued toward the pecan tree. Tom crouched. He touched it. Then he looked at Hannah. "Did you put anything here?" "No." Tom stood slowly. "Then where did this come from?" Hannah looked toward June. The striped cow had already walked back beneath the pecan tree. And this time, she was digging. Hannah didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dark strip of soil beneath the fence. By sunrise, she was back outside with a shovel. June was already waiting beside the pecan tree. The cow watched Hannah approach, then lowered her head toward the same patch of earth. "You knew," Hannah whispered. June nudged the dirt. Hannah started digging. 3 inches. 6. 9. The soil changed again. Below the dry surface was a layer of dark, damp earth packed with thin white roots. Hannah stopped. The roots were unusually dense. They spread beneath the pasture, like threads. She followed them with her fingers until they disappeared beneath the fence. Then June pushed her nose into Hannah's shoulder. Hannah looked up. On the other side of the fence stood Tom Barlow. He hadn't announced himself. "You're digging up your grandfather's pasture," he said. Hannah stood. "I found roots." Tom looked at the hole. "Those are pecan roots." "I know." "Then what are you looking for?" Hannah looked at June. "I don't know yet." Tom's eyes moved to the cow. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he said something Hannah didn't expect. "Your grandfather kept records on this field." "Yes." "More than cattle records." Hannah tightened her grip on the shovel. "What kind?" Tom looked toward the old barn. "Walter once asked me to inspect this pasture after a county drainage project." Hannah's heart skipped. "When?" 20 years ago." "What happened?" Tom rubbed his jaw. "The ditch crew changed the grade along the western boundary, and the pasture started holding water." Hannah stared at the ground. "That doesn't explain June." "No." Tom paused. "It might explain why June keeps standing here." He walked away before Hannah could ask another question. That afternoon, Hannah climbed into the cab of the old John Deere 4020. The tractor coughed twice before starting. Walter had always called it Old Green. Hannah put in low gear and drove toward the western boundary. The pasture looked ordinary from a distance. Up close, it wasn't. The grass was shorter along one narrow line. The pecan trees were greener. And beneath the surface, the soil remained damp. Hannah shut off the tractor. She climbed down and knelt. A tiny earthworm curled through the dirt. Then another. Then dozens. The soil was alive. She dug another hole several feet away. Dry. She dug beside the dark line. Moist. Hannah frowned. Something underground was carrying water, but there was no irrigation pipe on the farm. She returned to the farmhouse and opened Walter's records again. This time she searched for the word drainage. She found it on page 17 of an old field notebook. October 1999, County Wyden Road. Water shifted east. Pecan survived. Below that was another line. Bluebell calved strangely. Hannah's hand froze. She turned the page. Nothing. Another page. Nothing. Then, almost at the back, she found a drawing. It was a crude map of the farm, the western fence, the pecan tree, the drainage ditch, and a red circle around the exact place where June now stood. Underneath, Walter had written, "The ground remembers water longer than people do." Hannah read it slowly. Then she looked outside. The sun was dropping. June was standing beneath the pecan tree again. But there was something different. 3 calves from a neighboring pasture had gathered at the fence. They weren't looking at Hannah. They were looking at June. One calf pushed its nose through the wire. June approached. The calf sniffed her. Then all 3 calves began pawing the same patch of earth. Hannah's stomach tightened. Why were they doing that? She walked closer. The animals weren't interested in June's stripes. They were interested in the soil. The next morning, Hannah called Texas A&M's County Extension office. She explained the soil problem. Then she explained the cow. There was silence. The extension agent asked for photographs. Hannah sent them. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. The man's voice had changed. "Ms. Mercer, where exactly is this cow?" "McLennan County." "I know that. What I mean is, what is her breeding?" "I don't know." "Do you have registration papers?" "No." "Her dam." "Bluebell." "What breed?" "Commercial cross." Another pause. "That's not enough." "What does that mean?" "I mean the markings aren't diagnostic by themselves." Hannah exhaled. "I figured. But there's something else." She sat down. "What?" "The striping appears unusually bilateral." Hannah looked toward the pasture. "English. Both sides of the body are showing related patterning." So I'd like to see the photographs at higher resolution." Hannah sent another set. The reply came almost immediately. "Do not sell the cow." Hannah stared at the message. Then the phone rang again. "Who is this?" "I'm Dr. Elena Ruiz. Animal genetics." Hannah stood. "What did you see?" "I don't know yet." "Then why did you tell me not to sell her?" "Because if the pattern is what I think it might be, the cow may be genetically unusual." Hannah's pulse increased. "Unusual how?" "I need a sample. Blood. Hair first." Hannah looked toward June. The cow was standing beneath the pecan tree. "You're serious?" "Yes." Hannah agreed. 2 days later, Dr. Ruiz arrived with another researcher. They carried sample bags, sterile equipment, and a portable scanner. Tom Barlow came too. So did Dale Whitaker. The news had spread. 6 people stood around the pasture. Dale crossed his arms. "So the tiger finally get a scientist?" Nobody laughed. Dr. Ruiz approached June slowly. She studied the cow from a distance. Then she walked around her. She didn't touch the animal. She simply watched. Finally, she said, "She's not showing a normal random pattern." Dale snorted. "She's a cow with stripes." Dr. Ruiz looked at him. "That's exactly why I'm interested." She collected several hairs from June's tail. Then she scanned the skin beneath the dark bands. The machine beeped. She frowned. "What?" Dr. Ruiz looked at Hannah. "The pigmentation follows developmental boundaries." Hannah didn't understand. Dr. Ruiz explained carefully. "Imagine the calf developing before birth. Different groups of pigment-producing cells migrate through the skin. Usually, the final pattern is messy. Here, something appears to be organizing those cells differently." "So she's a hybrid?" "No." "A new breed?" "No." "Then what is she?" Dr. Ruiz hesitated. "That is what we're trying to find out." The sample was packed. The researchers prepared to leave. Then June suddenly walked away from them. She went straight to the western fence and stopped. Dr. Ruiz followed. Hannah followed her. June pawed the earth. Once. Twice. Then she lowered her head and began licking the soil. Dr. Ruiz crouched. Her expression changed. She dug beneath the surface with a gloved hand. A few inches down, she found something dark. Not a root, not a stone, a piece of old black plastic tubing. She pulled it free. Water immediately seeped from the broken end. Everyone went silent. Dr. Ruiz stared at the tube. There's your water. Hannah looked toward the western boundary. Where does it go? Dr. Ruiz didn't answer. She followed the tubing beneath the fence. It disappeared into the neighboring field. Dale Whitaker's face hardened. That line shouldn't be there. Tom looked at him. You know something? Dale shook his head. No, but he wasn't looking at Tom. He was looking at Hannah. And Hannah suddenly realized something. The strange cow wasn't merely standing over a wet patch of ground. She had been following something underground, something connected to the old drainage system. And whatever that buried line was carrying, it was flowing directly beneath Hannah's farm. That evening, Dr. Ruiz called. Her voice was quiet. We got the preliminary genetic result. Hannah sat upright in bed. What did you find? A pause. Then Dr. Ruiz said, Your cow isn't just unusual. Another pause. We found something we need to investigate immediately. Hannah sat on the edge of her bed with the phone pressed against her ear. What did you find? Dr. Elena Ruiz didn't answer immediately. Then she said, A genetic marker we weren't expecting. Hannah looked through the farmhouse window. June was visible beneath the pecan tree, motionless in the moonlight. What kind of marker? One associated with pigmentation development. That doesn't sound dangerous. It isn't. Dr. Ruiz paused. But it isn't common either. Hannah waited. We compared June's sample against several cattle databases. Her pattern doesn't match any recognized breed standard. So she's a new breed? No. Then what? We don't know yet. Hannah rubbed her forehead. She had spent 3 weeks listening to people call her cow strange. Now a genetics laboratory was telling her that strange was scientifically interesting. That wasn't the same thing as valuable. And valuable was what Hannah needed. Her bank payment was due in 9 weeks. The hay supplier had already warned her that prices were going up. 3 cows had lost weight during the summer. And the old 4020 needed a hydraulic repair that could cost more than she had in savings. A strange cow wouldn't pay those bills. At least, not yet. The following morning, Dr. Ruiz returned with 2 technicians. This time they brought a larger scanner. They also brought a soil scientist. That surprised Hannah. I thought you were studying June. We are. Dr. Ruiz pointed toward the western pasture. But the cow keeps taking us to the same place. The soil scientist, Marcus Bell, walked to the fence carrying a sampling auger. He drilled into the ground. At 12 inches, the soil was damp. At 18 inches, it was wetter. At 24 inches, the auger struck something hard. Marcus pulled it out. A black layer coated the metal. He rubbed it between his fingers. Organic rich soil. Hannah looked confused. Is that good? Marcus smiled slightly. Usually. He took another sample. This time he smelled it. Then he looked toward the pecan trees. Your grandfather wasn't fertilizing this area. No. Then why is the carbon level this high? Hannah didn't know. Marcus walked farther down the field. He took samples every 20 yards. The results formed a strange line. The soil grew richer toward the old drainage ditch. Then suddenly it stopped. At the end of the line stood June. She was staring at Marcus. Marcus stared back. You've got an animal with better field instincts than most consultants. Hannah smiled for the first time that morning. Then Marcus said something that erased it. This isn't just groundwater. What is it? Something is feeding the soil. They dug deeper. At 3 feet, they found an old concrete drainage channel. It was cracked, but still partially intact. Water moved slowly through it. The channel ran beneath the pasture and toward the pecan grove. Marcus traced its direction on a map. Then he stopped. The line crossed directly beneath an abandoned cattle pen. Hannah remembered the pen. Walter had stopped using it before she was born. She had always assumed it was because the boards were rotten. That afternoon, she pulled the boards away. Behind them was an old steel hatch. Hannah called Tom. He arrived 20 minutes later. They opened it together. A narrow chamber lay beneath the ground. Inside were rusted pipes, broken valves, and a metal box. Tom stared. I haven't seen this in 20 years. Hannah looked at him. You knew? I knew there was an old drainage system. You didn't know about this? No. Hannah opened the metal box. Inside was a notebook. Walter's handwriting. The first page was dated 1998. The notes described a drainage experiment Walter had conducted after repeated flooding. He had installed a buried diversion line to keep standing water away from the cattle. But the system had done something unexpected. It had redirected water beneath the pecan grove. Walter had written observations for years. Tree growth, soil moisture, earthworm populations, root depth. Then Hannah found a page with one sentence circled. The healthiest trees are growing above the old line. Below it was another note. Cattle choose the same ground after rain. Hannah slowly looked toward June. The cow wasn't guessing. She was following the conditions created by the underground system. But the question remained, why did June have stripes? Dr. Ruiz returned that evening. She examined the notebook. This helps. How? Because now we know the environment may have influenced the expression of some traits. Hannah frowned. You mean the soil changed your genes? No. Dr. Ruiz shook her head. Genes are the instructions. Environment can influence how some instructions are expressed. It doesn't rewrite the entire instruction manual. She pointed toward June. Think of it like a piano. The genes give the instrument its keys. Development determines which keys get played and when. Hannah looked at the cow. So the soil made her stripes? No, not directly. Then what did? Dr. Ruiz smiled. That is the part we still don't know. The next week, Hannah's situation became worse. The bank sent a formal notice. If she couldn't make the upcoming payment, the farm would be placed under review. Hannah sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter. Her grandfather had spent his entire life keeping the farm alive. She had one question. Could she do the same? She looked outside. June stood alone in the pasture. Then Hannah noticed something. The cow was facing the road. A truck was approaching. It belonged to a cattle buyer. Hannah stood immediately. The buyer parked beside the gate. I hear you got a special animal. Hannah said nothing. I'll give you $4,000. Her heart jumped. $4,000 would cover the hydraulic repair. Maybe the hay. Maybe the bank payment. The buyer smiled. That's more than she's worth. Hannah looked at June. The cow was standing beneath the pecan tree for $1,000. It was the largest offer Hannah had received for anything all year. She almost said yes. Then she remembered Walter's photograph. Do not let them call her. Hannah shook her head. No. The buyer's smile disappeared. You sure? Yes. He drove away. Hannah watched the truck disappear down the road. She wasn't sure whether she had just protected the future of the farm or sacrificed it. 2 days later, the genetic lab called again. Dr. Ruiz sounded different, more excited. We finished the sequencing. Hannah stood beside the barn. What did you find? We found a rare inherited variant affecting pigmentation. Hannah waited. And it's associated with a developmental pathway we've been studying. Is it dangerous? No. Is it useful? Dr. Ruiz laughed softly. Potentially. Hannah's stomach tightened. How potentially? We need to visit your farm. Why? We found something in the genetic data that shouldn't be ignored. What? We compared June's sequence with archive samples. And her lineage may connect to an old cattle population that researchers thought had disappeared from this region. Hannah looked at the pasture. The cow's stripes suddenly seemed less like an accident, more like a message from a forgotten bloodline. But before Hannah could respond, Dr. Ruiz added one sentence. And there's something else. Hannah waited. We found a second cow. Hannah's face went still. What second cow? In your grandfather's records. Hannah turned toward the farmhouse. The cow listed beside June's mother. What about her? She wasn't sold. Hannah felt a chill. Then where is she? Dr. Ruiz answered quietly. That's what we're coming to find out. The next morning, Hannah searched every page of Walter's records. At the very bottom of one cattle ledger, she found an old ear tag number, M17. Beside it, Walter had written, "Move before inspection." Hannah stared at the words. Then she heard hooves outside. She walked to the window. June wasn't alone. A second cow stood at the far end of the pasture, an older black and white cow. Hannah had never seen her before, and even from the farmhouse window, Hannah could see the stripes. Hannah didn't move. The older cow stood beyond the pecan grove, half hidden in the morning mist, black and white, thin, scarred along one shoulder, and unmistakably striped. Hannah grabbed her boots. By the time she reached the pasture, the cow had disappeared behind the trees. She followed the hoof prints until they ended beside the western fence. There, beneath the pecan tree, June was waiting. Dr. Elena Ruiz arrived less than an hour later. She studied the photographs Hannah had taken. Then she looked toward the empty field. That's the cow. Hannah nodded. Who owns her? Dr. Ruiz shook her head. We don't know. Tom Barlow arrived next. When Hannah showed him the photograph, his face changed. I've seen that cow. When? Years ago. Where? Tom pointed toward the old county drainage road. Across the property. Hannah's stomach tightened. The Whitaker place? Tom nodded. Dale Whitaker, the man who had laughed at June, the man who had offered nothing but jokes when everyone else thought Hannah was foolish. Hannah drove there that afternoon. Dale was repairing a gate. When he saw her, he stopped. You looking for something? I think one of your cows wandered onto my land. Dale frowned. Then Hannah showed him the photograph. He stared at it for several seconds. Finally, he said, That cow isn't mine. Then whose is she? Dale looked toward the western pasture. My father used to keep her. Hannah felt the pieces move. Why? Dale didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward an old equipment shed. Inside was a stack of weathered cattle records. He opened a ledger. There it was, M17, the same number from Walter's notebook. Dale swallowed. My father bought her from your grandfather in 2001. Hannah stared at him. Walter sold her? Apparently. But his note says move before inspection. Dale nodded. He didn't want the county veterinarian looking at her. Why? Dale looked uncomfortable. Because everybody thought the calf was sick. The calf? June. Hannah's breathing slowed. Dale continued. Your grandfather's cow had a calf with stripes. My father thought it was some kind of disease. Walter didn't. Hannah looked toward the road. What did Walter do? He took the mother and moved her temporarily. Where? Dale pointed behind the shed. She stayed here. Hannah couldn't believe it. For more than 20 years. The cow had lived less than 2 miles away. And Walter had known. Dale handed her another page. At the bottom was Walter's handwriting. Pattern remains healthy. Observe offspring. Hannah closed her eyes. Her grandfather had been watching this line for decades. He hadn't known exactly what it meant, but he had believed it mattered. That evening, Dr. Ruiz collected samples from the older cow. The results came 2 weeks later. June and M17 shared the same rare inherited variant, but that wasn't the biggest discovery. Dr. Ruiz had compared their sequence against archived cattle genetics databases. The closest matches came from historical cattle populations documented in Texas during the 19th and early 20th centuries. A forgotten line, not a new breed, not a disease, not a hybrid, a surviving genetic trait that had nearly disappeared from commercial herds. Hannah stared at the report. So June is a miracle. No, Dr. Ruiz said. She isn't a new species. No, she isn't sick. Absolutely not. Hannah smiled. What is she? Dr. Ruiz looked toward the pasture. She is evidence. The word stayed with Hannah. Evidence of what? A forgotten bloodline? A hidden trait? An old agricultural population that had survived through generations of ordinary cattle? Then Dr. Ruiz explained the second discovery. The laboratory wanted to study the lineage, not because June was valuable as a novelty, because rare genetic traits could help researchers understand cattle development, pigmentation, inheritance, and genetic diversity. The lab wanted permission to collect additional samples. They also offered Hannah a research partnership. It wasn't millions. It wasn't a miracle check, but it was enough to cover the immediate testing. More importantly, the lab offered something Hannah hadn't had in years. Time. The bank agreed to restructure the farm loan after the research partnership was documented. The hydraulic, repair was completed, the 4020 returned to the field, and the pecan grove became the center of a small research project. But the most unforgettable moment came in November. The genetics team arrived with cameras, soil equipment, and a portable scanner. Hannah walked June toward the pecan tree. The morning sun struck the cow's back. For the first time, everyone could see the stripes clearly. They weren't painted. They weren't scars. They weren't shadows. They ran in long, dark bands across June's white body, following the shape of her ribs and shoulders. Behind her stood the older cow, M17. 2 generations. 2 living pieces of a genetic history nobody had realized was still walking through a Texas pasture. Dr. Ruiz stood silently. Tom removed his hat. Even Dale Whitaker didn't joke. Hannah rested her hand against June's neck. The cow stood still. For years, people had seen something strange. Hannah had seen something worth understanding. That was the difference. People saw a tiger cow. She saw a question. And the question had finally led somewhere. 5 years later, the farm looked different. The western pasture had been restored. The old drainage system was repaired rather than abandoned. The pecan grove produced consistently. Hannah planted additional trees along the natural moisture line. The farm never became a giant operation. She didn't want it to. Instead, it became known for something quieter: research, cattle genetics, heritage livestock, and the preservation of unusual traits that commercial agriculture often overlooked. June was still alive, older now, slower, but still striped. Children from nearby farms sometimes visited. Hannah showed them the old photograph of Walter. Then she showed them June. The children always asked the same question: why does she look like a tiger? Hannah smiled. I don't know. That answer was still honest. But now she could add something else. That's why we kept looking. Dale changed too. He stopped calling June the tiger cow. He started calling her Miss June. Tom Barlow eventually retired. Before he left the county office, he visited Hannah one final time. He stood beside the old 4020. I owe you an apology, he said. Hannah looked at him. For what? For laughing. Hannah smiled. You weren't the only one. Tom looked toward the pasture. No. He paused. But you were the one who stayed curious. That mattered more than being right. The farm became profitable again. Not because June suddenly became $1 million animal. Not because a laboratory turned her into a celebrity. The farm survived because Hannah learned to pay attention to what everyone else ignored: the wet ground, the old drainage line, the pecan roots, the cattle behavior, the forgotten records, and the strange stripes. Every piece had been there before she understood any of it. Nature had never hidden the answer. It had simply refused to explain it quickly. 10 years after the first photograph, Hannah opened the farmhouse door before sunrise. The old John Deere 4020 sat beneath the shed. She climbed into the seat. The engine turned once, then started. One crank, just like Walter's. Hannah drove slowly toward the orchard. Mist rested between the pecan trees. June stood near the fence. Her coat was beginning to gray around the face, but the dark bands across her ribs were still visible. A younger calf stood beside her, and on its white shoulder was a narrow, dark stripe. Hannah stopped the tractor. She didn't say anything. She simply watched. Behind her, the orchard stirred in the morning wind. The first bees moved between the blossoms. The old drainage channel carried water beneath the roots. The grass bent softly along the fence. And June lifted her head toward the rising sun. For years, people had laughed at the cow that looked like a tiger. But the cow had never needed to prove anything. She had only needed someone patient enough to notice. Morning mist settled over the orchard. June took one slow step forward, and the old farm woke around her.